Essentially, as we saw already in the 20s and 30s, when Arabs are violent towards Jews, the tendency is to cave into their demands, such as closing the gates to Jewish immigration. When the Jews begin to win, the response is always ceasefire. So this is what you have with the armistice agreements after 1948-49. And in 67, you have the same pattern. As we said, the Arab states after 48-49 said, this is a temporary pause, but the war, the bigger war against the existence of a Jewish state, that war continues. Generally in diplomacy, when one side wins decisively, the path to peace, and Dr. Shani Moore wrote about it beautifully, the path to peace involves recognizing some of the wins of the side that was victorious, except when it comes to the Jews in Israel. No, you get nothing, and this has to go back, but this time you'll get peace. The Arab response is swift. They declare in Khartoum, no to recognition, no to peace, no to negotiations. The idea of a just solution to the Arab refugee problem has become a key word that confuses many in the West. When you hear a just solution, you think, okay, justice would be some form of compensation for lost livelihood and house. And if that's the case, we need to discuss compensation for Jewish refugees. We need to discuss compensation for Jewish refugees across the Arab world, not just in Jerusalem and the West Bank. But people think a just solution to a refugee problem is getting them citizenship, getting them maybe some compensation if possible. End of story. This is the vision of the Refugee Convention for everyone else. In the Arab telling, in the Palestinian telling, a just solution is only one. It's the solution that undoes the injustice, which is the existence of the Jewish state. So every time that we see in various documents a just solution to the Arab refugee problem, Westerners think, oh, it means one thing. And for the Arab refugees, it means one thing and one thing only, their idea of what they call return. The idea of return is generally against the idea of ending wars. For the tens of millions of refugees after World War II, the message was basically tough, tragic, sad, move on. It was understood that return would be a continuation of the war by other means, which is exactly what the Arab refugees wanted, which is why they insisted on this idea of a right of return. Now, there's no such right in international law. Even Resolution 194, which they quote as if it gives it to them, does not give it, if only for the simple reason that General Assembly resolutions don't grant rights. A reminder also that the Arabs rejected that resolution because it was just part of a bigger process of making peace with the Jewish state. But there's actually no right of return for Arab refugees into the sovereign state of Israel in international law. It doesn't exist. But they believe they have it. And they have made it into a tool and a mechanism of continuing the war. So the idea of justice, return, no Jewish state are basically all synonyms. There's no understanding October 7th without understanding the entire Palestinian ideology of no Jewish state, of return, of perpetual refugeedom. It all comes together in Gaza. You can't understand Gaza and October 7th without knowing that the vast majority of Gaza's residents, about 75%, are registered by UNRWA as refugees from Palestine. This is by now a fifth generation of people who were born in Palestine, right? Whatever your political views, we can agree that the Gaza Strip is Palestine, right? It's between the river and the sea. They have been born in Palestine. They have always lived in Palestine, and yet they are registered as refugees from Palestine, which would be nonsensical unless you understand that from their perspective, the only Palestine that matters is from the river to the sea, where there's no Jewish state. So you have 3/4 of Gaza's residents being told day after day, generation after generation, Gaza is not your home. Don't treat it as your home. Your real home is where the Jewish state exists right now. And that's what you need to take back in their mind. Generation after generation is raised with the idea that they shouldn't be making their home in Gaza, but that their most noble goal is to liberate from the river to the sea land, the mythological Palestine, from the evil white settler, European crusader Jews. They are legitimized in that by an organization that has the letters UN, right? The Arabs were very far-reaching in understanding the importance of that. It gets Western money. So that must be just. This is a just cause. As a result, when Israel leaves the Gaza Strip, it leaves 80% of it under the Oslo Accords in the 90s. The remaining 20% Israel leaves with the disengagement in 2005. And this is the first time that the Arabs of the land actually control territory. Do they say to themselves, finally, we got rid of the Jews and the settlers and the occupation, and we are going to build a pearl, a Dubai on the Levant, a Singapore of the Mediterranean? No. What they say, excellent. We now control territory from which we can take back Palestine from the river to the sea. And I have by now books, essays, lectures that say the same thing to all the funders of UNRWA who believe that this is some innocent idea. Tell them every dollar, every sack of cement that you are giving into Gaza, and I'm saying this for years, is guaranteed to go into building tunnels, is guaranteed to go into making Gaza into a formidable war machine, because the people of Gaza don't think of Gaza as their home. They think of it literally as a launch pad. And October 7th needs to be understood as the exercise of Palestinian return. Return was never an innocent idea. If you look at the Arab texts from the early 50s, return was always a violent, triumphant idea. We are going to go back and essentially slaughter the Jews. This is how we take back Palestine. This is how we liberate it. October 7th was minute by minute the Palestinian vision of return. This is why there's so much exhilaration, thrill, because this is what they've been waiting for, groomed for decades, and they see it, and they could not be happier. They look at 7 million Jews struggling to survive amidst 500 million Arabs, 1.5 billion Muslims, and they say to themselves, this is not going to last much longer, this Jewish experiment in self-determination. 1 more generation, 5 more generations, will wait them out. More than that, what they discovered in their battle against the Jews is that they have a massive asset. Let's admit the truth. No one would have cared about the few million Arabs between the river and the sea if their enemies had not been the Jews. As a result, every anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist ideology in the last century adopted the Palestinian cause as the respectable mask for its anti-Jewish ideology. So the Nazis were the main backers of the Palestinians in the 30s and 40s, and then it was the pan-Arabists who made the Palestinians into a theology of their cause, and then it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s the Soviets who launched this global anti-Zionism campaign, and then in the 90s and early 2000s it's the Sunni jihadists, and now it's the Shiite jihadists and the ones I call the Western communists, and they are all channeling their anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic ideologies through the support of the Palestinian cause, which for the last century has been formulated around no Jewish state, no sovereign Jews. So that's the very dark side. And they're the ones that are always happy to rush in whenever the Arabs of this land could have had a moment when they said, you know what, this is not working out too well. Maybe we should stop investing all our resources in getting rid of the Jewish state. Not a good use of our time. Every time that they could have had this moment, every anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish ideology of the moment rushes in to tell them, no, no, you're pure victims of a great evil, change nothing, you're responsible for nothing. So they actually get that fuel to keep going. Where do I see the hope? The hope is precisely in the transformation of the fundamental attitude towards Jewish sovereignty, because that's what's at the core of the conflict. When I give this talk and I say, look, the conflict at the end of the day is very simple. It's between the Jews wanting a state and the Arabs not wanting the Jews not to have a state, right? Bevin, Zionism versus anti-Zionism. No Arab ever contradicts it. They will dig deeper. They're like, of course, you're white, settler, European, murderers, blah. But no one will say, what are you talking about? Our only problem is with the settlements or with Netanyahu. They always confirm. They might think that it's the right thing to do. They certainly think that it's the right thing to fight the Jewish state, but they don't dispute that this is what they're fighting. So this is the thing that needs to change. The very Arab and Muslim attitude towards Jewish sovereignty. And this is where I begin to see hope in kind of the Abraham Accords countries, where I think what they're doing is much more important than high rises and sending female astronauts to space. I think they're engaged in nothing less than the transformation of the Arab and Muslim identity towards one that is modern, future-looking, success-oriented, tolerant. And as part of that, I call us collateral benefit. We're not the central story here. They can look at the Jews and not say white European settler, colonialist, crusaders, which is just synonyms for foreign. They can look at us and say, Abraham, the Jews belong here by virtue of a history and a culture and a continuous relationship that is embedded in their culture. And we as Arabs and Muslims have a history that recognizes that. And we can embrace them, and we can embrace Zionism, and we can embrace the state of Israel as the legitimate continuation of the historical connection between the Jews and the land. That's where the hope is.